Hmm. All right, so we're gonna get started here. This is season one of the series on narcissism and episode three. And so this one is entitled. I'm going to tell you what it's entitled in just a second because I gave it a long title. This is about like envy. This is about entitlement and shame and how they relate to narcissism. So I need to do one thing real quick. Find this one and then say that we are actually going to share it with not just me, but the public for Facebook. I don't understand it all, but it seems to work that way. All right. As long as it's working, we're good. So anyway, you know, it's a very interesting thing to ponder, narcissism as a topic and to get into it because parts of it can get kind of complex and some of it can get very interesting because it's multifaceted. It's not just one thing. And then what does narcissism look like in individuals, and then what does it look like in a corporate culture? Um, there's some things that are very unique to one, and then there's also various types and expressions of narcissists. So I want to read a couple things real quick that you know, these are some things that are typically the core. Okay, so the core psychological issues associated with narcissism include a pervasive sense of grandiosity. That one sometimes is not always seen for what it is because grandiosity, for what we think it's somebody who thinks they're all it. And narcissism can certainly look that way, but it's a self-absorbed kind of um over focus on self that raises the self, right? I'm more important than anybody in the room, subconsciously or consciously. So, and it's also a strong need for admiration, a lack of empathy, and a deep seated feeling of entitlement. I mean, the way this thing will play out with the episodes that go on this topic of narcissism, there will be a lot of overlap in places. It's hard to talk about one dynamic without hitting, something very similar. And so, and it may seem like we go and we're talking about one thing and it kind of shifts into something. Let's just say that it's going to continue to unfold, and parts of it will actually be things that I actually research because I'm trying to figure some things out myself. There's no way to wrap your head around this totally, but I think there's some ways that we can kind of wrap our head around it in a way that allows us to minister to people and see them integrate fully with themselves, with others, and with God, and turn them out of their over obsession with self, which is usually out of pain and out of trauma and shame, into becoming loving people. Like Jesus said, if you want to lose your life, right? If you want to gain your wait a minute, the saying I'm thinking of is basically you have to lose your life to find your life. Okay. And that's in the Christian world, that's what it is. We find life by giving our life away, which is what precisely narcissists are often incapable of doing. They're not capable of true giving. They can they're capable of maintaining an image that they are giving, that they are generous, that they are everything, all of those things. But in terms of being able to give themselves away to other people and to be engaged in loving others, you know, well, that's the challenge for the narcissist because they never receive that. Whether, like I said, a lot of things are perceptual in terms of deficit. Doesn't mean that there weren't people in their life that loved them. I mean that heart did not encounter that. And the heart's response to what happened was to wall oneself up behind a wall of shame. Okay. But some of the things we think about: lack of empathy, need for affirmation, entitlement. When we get into things like entitlement, there's so many different varieties of entitlement, particularly as we look at culture. Okay. And a core characteristic of narcissist is lawlessness, while appearing and maintaining and advocating that they give themselves fully to all kinds of law and rule of law, etc. they do that while not doing any of it, right? So with the mouth, that's why you always see an inconsistency. That's why this misinformation is such a big deal, right? Because my joke has always been, if you want to know what evil people, and I'm not using that to be like hardcore, like axe murder evil, what they're doing is whatever they're accusing you of doing. When I say it, I'm referring primarily to lawlessness. Okay. And so lawless people project everything onto everyone else, and they themselves are being lawless, and yet they want to say that's what you're doing. So there's always a projection, there's always a way to turn it from me, turn it to somebody else, etc. Because part of their core issue is they can't own anything. Owning anything provokes such a powerful it hits the shame button so hard that for them to feel like they were to confront that would be death to them. It would be absolute death. So in terms of false self, you could have narcissists who are very sophisticated, um, very articulate, very charming, all of those things, um, and yet be incapable of love. And it just reminded me, I want to talk about a movie, one of my favorite movies. So entitlement, everybody owes you something. Let's see. Potential contributing factors, childhood experiences. There is the sense where some of them are people who have overindulgent parents who told them that they were the king of the universe. That's not typically the kind of narcissist that we're talking about that engages in lawlessness as a way of life. Low self esteem, inadequacy, certainly, and trauma. Um, I want to quote Scott Peck. I was going through his book before I got on here, People of the Lie, very good book. And the previous one, Scott became a Christian along the way. And part of his becoming a Christian had to do with his exploration of human evil in the context of his psychiatric practice, where he did extensive counseling. And there was one person he called Charlene, and she turned him inside out. She was so sophisticated in her defenses and what she was able to do to keep the light of things off of her, that it was the one it was the case that helped him define what human evil is. And in his context, he's not defining human evil again as the thing that acts murderers, that kind of thing. He said this in The Road Less Traveled. He said, it's not their sins per se that characterize evil people. Rather, it is the subtlety and persistence and consistency of their sins. This is because the central defect of evil is not the sin, but the refusal to acknowledge it. That is like such a profound statement, because a narcissist is consistently steamrolling, bullying, gaslighting, other people, right, as a way of life. So their basic thing is they live in a perpetual mode of projection and denial, and kind of like the thing where you flip it off of me and onto you. And I've said, when you get in a conversation with the true narcissist, you go in and say something like, I just want to know why we're not doing X, Y, and Z in your company, right? You end up nailing them here, and they spiral and they spiral and they spiral and they spiral, because all you really wanted to know was why they didn't turn in the report, whatever it is, whatever you will want to require of them. Part of the problem is you can't require anything of them, because they will not give anything that they don't want to give. It's this radical commitment to self-preservation. And so you go in to do one thing and you walk away feeling like you're the idiot, like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I must have 100 million things wrong with me, etc. Because they make you feel like you're the problem. They can never, ever look at themselves. And that's the part when he talks about the consistency and persistence of their sin. He is not talking about sin as a construct as much in this thing, as much as he is in the metaphor of their persistence and commitment to them is out of a profound sense of entitlement, and a profound sense of not being able to ever face anything. So what it means is that they're going to be persistently and consistently the same in that regard in terms of what they do with you and others. And so again, it's all smoke screen, so we can't ever look at me. That's the problem. So one of my favorite movies I'll talk about today, um, and I was going to get into envy. So one of these, the way this thing kind of works is I may end up on something and have to change the title of the session a little bit because I really do want to engage with this in a way that but the Holy Spirit's just kind of putting something together for us, something that becomes a tool and being able to see things in other people that also provokes our compassion. Okay. And that also provokes our awareness that everybody is one encounter away from being able to have a radical transformation in Jesus. There is hope and healing for evil people. And like I said, by evil, I'm not talking about the accident. I'm talking about people who persistently will not examine their own heart. It's too painful. You have to be able to look at what's wrong. You don't really confront a narcissist very well. And if you've ever tried it, you will get the most defensive, in your face response back. In order to even address any kind of issue with a narcissist at all, you have to do it lightly and you have to tread real lightly and you have to do it when we're not in the moment. And even then, you may have an epic fail. Um, they we just have to understand that the wall of pain and the wall of shame that is kind of walled them off, okay, that they live behind this wall, and the shame is so deep and the shame is so huge that to face it would be death to them. A lot of what mental illness is, or where it comes from, let me say it this way, it comes from not so much the things that happen to us, but our reaction to those things. What did we do with our heart, consciously or unconsciously? And our response to what happened often becomes the place where mental illness begins to take root. Everybody has defenses. We all do. Okay. I've given the example. I'm going to talk about my movie here. I've given the example before about, it's about the little big wheel. When I came home one day, my mom is a single mom. The house had been robbed, everything is turned inside out. She is crying. The police are there. And in the middle of the chaos, I see this little big wheel over here that her boss had come there on lunch hour to put together for me. So in the middle of all of the chaos and everything that's blowing up around me, mom says, Scotty, go, why don't you take your big wheel and go outside? So I went outside and I continued to ride my big wheel. Early childhood trauma and the resiliency of children is like that. We often don't know what kind of bombs, chaotic bombs, have gone off on the inside of them because we have a God given ability at that point to disconnect. So let's just say it like this. Yes, they disconnect from some of the trauma. They have a resiliency that, a lot of us in later life don't have. And so they have to go on. It's a survival thing. Okay. But somewhere in this hard drive of their heart is stored the trauma. And somewhere in that hard drive, they will begin to build a set of defenses to avoid certain kinds of pain that they have felt like would take them out. It's a perceptual thing, like everything. And again, everything's on a continuum for me. So, whatever we determine as death back here, right? The thing that we can't face, right? For example, a woman who is in high school, she experiences a rape, she makes a commitment that she can never ever feel that kind of vulnerability again. That doesn't make her necessarily a narcissist, but it makes her one who is so defended against the pain that happened that she cannot engage rightly with love until she faces that, is able to reconcile that, forgive that, and let it go, and not let it be a predominant defense that runs in the hard drive of her heart, right? And we all have those places. So it doesn't mean that everybody that has a place of trauma is a narcissist. Again, narcissism is the overly self-indulgent, kind of selfish preoccupation, patient with self, that is destructive to my personhood. It doesn't just destroy other people, it destroys me. It cuts me off from love. It cuts me off from the very thing that I need, that I'm walled off from and defending myself from, because I don't believe at any kind of core level that there's something lovable about me. Okay. So, um, in the movie, it's ordinary people. I used to show this to groups a lot, and I'll give you the quick synopsis. But in the movie, you have two brothers, right? One is the firstborn, golden child, mom's favorite kid, can't do anything wrong. Then there's a younger brother that she loves, of course, but she doesn't have the same relationship with the kid. Now, everybody knows that mom and dad always say, "I love all my kids equally," right? Well, we do. But our relationship with each of our children is different, and their experience of us is different. So, in the same household, you could have one kid say, "I always knew that dad or mom loved me. I felt it." Another one might be saying, "Well, I always felt like he loved you more than me," right? Because everything is perceptual, it's what they take in. It's not always intended. So every kid in the family can have a different relationship with the parent and have a different perception of who that parent is. So in that sense, parents have different relationships with kids, and kids have different perceptions of their siblings in a family, and what those parents, where their heart was turned or not turned, etc., toward them. So in this movie, firstborn son and the secondborn, they're in a boating accident. Storm comes up, he's holding on to his brother's hand as much as hard as he can, and finally he can't help it. He lets go. So you have a kid who dies, and you have a kid who has great survival guilt. He feels guilty for being alive. Okay. And mom is really incapable of dealing with that kind of pain, and she doesn't know what to do. She's very much one of the people who, she looks good in public society. Everybody thinks she's a loving and generous person because she's bubbly. She has a great personality. And she doesn't know what to do with the son that remains, because um that wasn't her primary attachment. So there's this thing between her and Conrad, okay, where she isn't feel real capable, consciously or not, of loving him, and he obviously feels like, he's not loved by her. And because of his own survival guilt, he attempted to kill himself, and he cut his wrist in the bathroom. And this is one of those rare movies. Like most movies, I don't like the counselors because I'm like, okay, you're full of crap. It doesn't really go like that. But in this movie, I love the counselor because I think he really does help Conrad look at a couple things. Who does he need to forgive? Well, in this scenario, it's not just mom. Who do you really need to forgive if you're living with survival guilt, right? I need to let myself off the hook. And so he walks him through forgiveness, and of course, he goes through all the rage and the anger that goes with that process, and etc. And so he attempts to kill himself. And in his commentary with his counselor is, and this is very descriptive about how mom loved the appearances of everything being put together. She was very concerned of other people's perceptions of her. And he's telling her, the counselor, like, you don't have to understand. Everything had to be pitched. Like they groomed the grout, the whole bathroom had to be grouted. The towels had to be pitched, everything. Like, in other words, mom had to do the whole bathroom over because I totally destroyed it with my blood. Now, his commentary says a lot about how he perceived his mother's love. She was more concerned about the grout in the tile work than she was about him, who tried to kill himself because he had survival skill. And how she handles his subsequent recovery is also a challenge. Um, they make family decisions a lot, and so Conrad's in counseling, and so father wants to kind of protect that, but mom, decides that they need to go golfing. They need to go, golf outing. Why can't we do Christmas in London? Would that be so Dickens? Like etc. So her idea is she's trying to go on and act like the mess that's in the house isn't actually there. And she has this very aloof and like not able to connect with her son. They don't connect to each other at all. And the son's in counseling. And then the father goes into counseling at some point, and it changes things again. Because his whole heart in the context of trauma and the family is he's still turned towards his son. He's not turned towards himself. Where mom is completely turned towards herself, incapable of ever just loving and connecting with their son. And he is trying to figure out, like a lot of parents, a lot of married married folks cannot survive the loss of a child because it just doesn't. They turn on each other, they blame each other. It's like their world is built around that kid, and so when the kid is gone, it just kind of makes it confronts everybody with how empty and how all of that they are, and then it also confronts the nature of their own relationship to each other, and how much has been invested in kids and not really in the marriage, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, um, when the father gets into counseling, he realizes that he begins to slowly realize that his wife hasn't been real capable of loving him either. That she cares more about how things look. She doesn't like the fact that the therapist is Jewish and that he lives on the wrong side of town. It's interesting in the book, they describe the suburb in Chicago where they live is very pristine, right? Beautiful lawns, beautiful houses, beautiful. It's kind of like what's that movie? Oh shoot. What's it with Pleasantville? It's kind of Pleasantville-ish. Everything is nice and pristine. They have beautiful lawns. She goes off on her husband because they're at a party. He has a couple drinks and he tells somebody at the party that, my son is seeing a psychiatrist. And she's like, really? I thought he was so much further along. And Beth, the mother, hears this, and she's in the way home in the car. There's like a silence that is very loud. Her mood is controlling the atmosphere of the car. And he's asking, like, what's wrong? You don't get it, do you? The kind of business you go out talking about, that's private business. That generation that says all of those kind of things are private. Culturally, we look at things like mental illness differently, and we tend to have cultural responses to them. And not every culture is the same in how they look at things that would make us look bad. So evidently he broke a very big rule. And the husband, he's kind of half drunk, and he's like, well, I thought it was like a status symbol, right up there with going to Europe. You know what I mean? Having a psychiatrist. Doesn't everybody have a He's trying to make it kind of funny, and she's not having it. And her basic rule, which is a rule in most dysfunctional families, is what? Family business is family business, and we don't tell it outside. My wife and I had encountered a lot of that, probably her more so as a guidance counselor, than me. But we saw oftentimes, depending on family culture and background, and again, this is just any family, okay? A particular family. It doesn't mean that every family was the same, but it was like, you had to report abuse. You were a mandatory reporter. So if a kid came in and he looked like he had a cigarette burn on his leg, or he looked like he was bruised, like it was mandatory to report. But you knew that in doing so, that number one, that kid was going to pay for it. When the kid got home and the report had been filed, the kid would pay for it. And you also knew, number two, that the likelihood of that parent withdrawing their child from the school and placing them in another school was extremely high. And so it left you conflicted all the time, right? Because you have a mandatory thing by law to report what you see, and then when it happens, it's like, the kid pays. So in dysfunctional families, one of the big rules is we don't talk about family business. In fact, if we're going to go to a family dinner, maybe we get the little reminder as we're going, right? So we're going to have Christmas dinner with people that we never see, okay? And we only see them once a year at Aunt Tilda's house, okay? So when on the way there, mom, dad, or somebody says to the kids, okay, so Uncle Bobby just got out of prison. We're not saying a word about that. Nope, nope, nope. Aunt Tilda, she's off the wagon again. She might be a little bit drinking, right? And you go through this scenario of, maintaining appearance and things you're not allowed to say in a dysfunctional family. If in in a dysfunctional family or a system, if you tell the truth, you become the problem, right? So oftentimes the identified problem is like the kids, parents going to go to counseling. The dad's an alcoholic, but one of the kids is the black sheep of the family. He's all in trouble. So everything gets diverted to him. He becomes the scapegoat and the blame for everything in the family, and not the father's alcoholism. Never gets addressed. So you have a lot of rules and you have a lot of roles that people play. Kids are egocentric. Everything is about them. Everything revolves about them. And they're going to try to satisfy the tension in the house by their response to their parents in regards to tension. And that's how dysfunctional things get built into families. There's rules. If so and so, if mom doesn't talk to this relative for, 5 years, then you can't either, right? There's rules that are unwritten, and you don't really know if you crossed one until you've done it, right? Oh crap, I crossed the rule. And so they're kind of implied. And the more stuff that goes on in those households, the bigger that lie to protect what's going on becomes. And the consequences of not protecting it become very significant. Okay. In a system, if you tell the truth, you will become the problem and they will usher you out the door. I have zero experience in that one. Systems exist to preserve systems, whether it's a family system, a corporate system, a school system, whatever. And so, or even church systems and toxic church systems. I remember, I remember being, like leaving one church because it was so dysfunctional. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And then going to the mall and having people who went to that church walk on the other side of the mall, they wouldn't look at me. They wouldn't talk at me. Like, where did that come from? Did I cease to become the person that you knew, back when? Because to talk to me was a betrayal to the people that I was confronting. It's very all sick and twisted, right? And so oftentimes narcissists are projecting their shame onto others. Example, you have the rape of Tamar in the Bible, right? I need to talk about the end of the movie too. I'm going to come back to that. And, he Amnon does the whole thing. He lures her in, fake problem, brings her in, rapes her. She's screaming on the way out the door as he's telling her to get out, right? But we can do something about this. We could talk to our family. I could become your wife, whatever. Like, there's something we can do. She wants to give a solution. And he foist all of his shame and rage onto her. And when he did so, then it became a thing where she's the one that carries it all and she has to deal with that and gets sent away. And the person that he was the most disgusted with, his own shame, should have been himself. So shame tends to go in two directions. It gets foisted onto another, or it becomes internal as self-contempt. Um, so you see that dynamic. You see it with Cain and Abel. Envy and narcissism are hand in hand. Why? Because we envy others who possess qualities or characteristics or have things or do things that we feel like we do not, which is part of that same sense of entitlement. Um, Probably spend a whole one of these on just entitlement alone. Um, when you have a false self that's emerged, that is demanding that everybody around them pay attention to me. And also at the same time, I'm bending into you in every possible way because I'm trying to find affirmation with you. Then that sense of entitlement says but you owe me something because I'm missing something. So we take the gap of what we didn't get, and part of our heart still needs for that gap to be um filled, but we project that onto another. It's the victim mentality, okay? So in the victim mentality, what happens? Well, everybody out there is the bad guy except for me. And victims, it's easier to project onto others what they are or to the system about how it is without taking personal responsibility for myself, which means oftentimes that I don't want to look at that part. That's where the shame is. That's where the greatest shame is looking at myself. So we build mechanisms and our self-protective mechanisms to avoid pain, to avoid confronting our own shame, and it's walls of protection. The degree to which those walls of protection become very sophisticated um, is probably the degree to which you will see more breaks in mental health because they're not just simple, they're multi-layered, okay, defenses. You can't get to them. You try to confront something and you can never get in. You can never say anything that actually gets to the heart of the person. And so, and then if you reject a narcissist, then they will attempt to annihilate you because they don't know what to do with that rejection. Rejection is the primary wound that they're dealing with in their narcissism to begin with. It's the thing that they are in reaction to. They're in reaction to being rejected, protecting and building walls around their heart so that they don't ever have to be rejected or feel the pain of rejection again. So they project onto others, they lie consistently, they do all of those things to avoid pain and to avoid the pain of feeling rejected again. So the defenses can be simple or they could be very complex and hard to get through. So the story with the movie, and we'll wrap with that. So in the end, the father goes through counseling and he is examining all the things he's having to. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? What could we have done different? And when he brings any of that up at home, it's like, we're not doing that. Let's just take our trip to Europe. We'll be fine. I don't want to see a psychiatrist, Beth says in the restaurant. I don't need a psychiatrist, right? I don't want a psychiatrist, period. So the whole idea of counseling was like, no, it ain't happening. I'm me and I want to be me. That statement is very indicative of what it means to be entitled and to be profoundly shame based because I'm about me. Incapable of loving others is one of the biggest issues with narcissism. The reason Jesus wants to heal it is because it impacts our ability to love ourselves rightly, to love others rightly, and to love God because we're still so stuck in our own world and shell. And so I just realized we're going to talk about the disease of introspection during one of these. It's that painful kind of looking in that we do where the head and the heart are not fully connected. And so it's like we're always analyzing, we're always tearing ourselves apart. That is all part of that disease of introspection that comes from trauma. So, well, that's the whole thing, another one. But so at the end of the movie, um, he comes home after, being in a counseling session and he comes into the garage and he says to Beth, he said, he's crying. He said, I just want to ask one question. When we were doing our son's funeral, you were concerned about whether my socks were blue or black, and you didn't want me to wear the wrong color. Why was that important? Like, who cared? We lost our son this day. Who cares what color my socks are, right? And she does the placate thing that she knows. She's like, "Come here, baby. Come on inside," whatever. And it's like, it's not gonna work because he goes on and through his counseling, kind of process, one of the things that he discovered Conrad's same struggle was the same. The surviving kid was not able to access or even like mom could not relate to him, and the ability to communicate love just wasn't there. She wasn't able to come outside of herself in many places. And the husband discovers the same thing, that she hasn't been capable of loving. And he says to her, this is where you rejection of a narcissist, like this is where it all goes. I'm not sure I love you anymore. Now, does that mean that he doesn't have any love for his wife? No. I think what he was trying to say is, I realize that you haven't been capable of loving during the course of our marriage, and I I don't think that I'm all that connected to love with you. It would have been a statement that could have been easily brought into the counseling room, right? Could have been easily brought into something and actually go with it. Heart beliefs are heart beliefs, you know what I mean? We don't control that part. They come from something, but they tell us something. They're like the idiot gauges on the dashboard. They tell us something's going on. And in hearing that, she could not that was like death to her. And the movie ends kind of sadly. She goes in, she packs a suitcase, she gets up, leaves. She has like a teeny weeny tear, boop, right there, and that's about it. And she walks out the door without saying one thing to her husband or to her son. And they're sitting on the porch with the sprinklers going while, in their pajamas, kind of like, kind of reeling, but also kind of affirming that life is messy, but we're alive and we're going to be okay. I don't know what's happening with mom, but we're going to be okay. Interestingly, Mary Tyler Moore did that movie after her son committed suicide. And I've always used her in groups. I used her as an example of evil in everyday life, according to the way Scott Peck defines it, in that unwillingness to examine one's own heart, to not look at oneself. And I kind of used her as kind of the epitome picture of that, right? And I didn't really think too much more about it. And then one day, um, I'm watching this interview by Mary Tyler Moore, the actress, and the guy that's interviewing her is saying the same thing I'm saying, like, "You were just this cold, hard, callous, da 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 da." And she said, I never saw that character that way." She says, "I only ever saw her as stuck." And that hit me because that was the place of compassion. Part of the challenge that we have as believers is finding a place of compassion for people that we've struggled with, that haven't loved well, or we kind of frame them up in a place and we keep them in that little box. And we cut ourselves off from compassion. I'm fully capable of doing that. I've done that with people that have really betrayed us or hurt us, and we go through the process of forgiveness. Like, I forgive, and there is something very good about it, initiating forgiveness and saying it. And sometimes I have to tell my heart the truth and let my heart catch up. And that's not a bad process, right? We start with something, we offer the rest on the altar to Jesus, and we say, "I need you to do something in my heart where this is concerned, because I can't change me." I spent a lot of years where I would tell Jesus, "This is your responsibility. I need you to do something here so that I can actually offer up something different. I'm not capable of doing it myself. I don't know how to undo that," right? And so and some of those thoughts and belief systems become things that interfere with our ability to receive something that God actually wants to give us, because we've built this interior landscape, unknowingly, knowingly, or not. Doesn't really matter in terms of the practicality part of it. Our interior landscape is moving in a direction of unbelief, and we need to be operating in a place of belief. And oftentimes, because of trauma, we get stuck. I'm going to wrap this with this actually true statement. And so, like I said, these episodes on narcissism will go all over the map. They will all connect dots. and they will overlay and, all of that together. So I'm not really concerned about the goal is not to lay out a textbook thing on narcissism. The goal is to invite Jesus into something and to talk about something that helps motivate us and move us in our compassion towards people, and that absolutely affirms what the presence of Jesus. In his presence we become all things. So that affirms that in his presence everyone can be fully integrated. Everybody is one encounter away. But sometimes the information about the whys, it's kind of like, when you have an abusive parent and suddenly one day you hear the story about what their parent did to them, it doesn't change what happened to you. It doesn't change the fact that you need to forgive. It doesn't change a lot of things in you, except that it provokes compassion. Because as soon as we can put people in and see their limitations and see the things that the world that they came from that informed their decisions and their behaviors, etc., it does touch that place of compassion, because then we can see that, just like in this movie, Mary Tyler Moore was saying, I just ever saw her as stuck. People are stuck and they just need to get unstuck. And so if we relegate anyone into the category of they can never be changed, this whole lie that people don't change, that's bullcrap. People do change. They don't change on their own. They change with Jesus. Just saying. And so there is a thing that has been bred into our culture and into our own family cultures that say that people stay the same. No, they don't. One encounter of Jesus can change the trajectory of someone's life and destiny just like that. And we always have to know that no matter how badly we think people have behaved, we're going to see a number of people like Paul who were serving the other side. They were serving Satan in what they were doing. They get flipped on a dime. They become someone who was like crazily engaged with Jesus and kingdom of heaven. And suddenly they have influence in places that they've never had before because they already had influence. Big guy. Oh, what's it? Russell Brand, perfect example. The guy becomes a Christian. It's like people are still flocking to him. They still want to hear every word he has to say. That's going to become more normative in the days that come as we go. So just get ready for some flips on a dime. And the hope for the healing of the narcissist is that Jesus is the great um, integrator, and that in our encounter with him, not just hearing the word itself, but the marriage of the word with the encounter in our hearts can change us in a moment and take things that felt immovable. That's why I'm big time revival person, because I know that the grace that comes in revival is grace on steroids to move mountains that cannot be moved. It's called the glory, and in the glory things move easy. So I will wrap it with that and say, Lord, help us not to see another according to the way that we want to see them, through the grid of our own past, our own hurt, our own um, everything. I'm asking for the gift of fresh eyes to see, ways to see in, and that you would enable us to forgive so deeply from the heart that we would in turn become part of their healing in some capacity. Because there are things, Lord, that you were doing that cannot be stopped. And toppling giants and bringing in a reformation of the heart and a healing of the land in ways that we've never seen. So, in conjunction and along with that, would you do something that changes our perceptions so that we can see people rightly and see them as more like us than different from us, in terms of their equation and what broke in their life and the way that they broke as a result, that we are more like them, and that you would move us in ways of compassion in what we see and the new eyes. This is the way that the prodigals return. Okay. This is the way these millennials come home. We see something, our own hearts get adjusted. Lord, I'm asking you, and this is, I'm being just real here. I've had a hard time letting go of 2024 because it's all trauma to me, most of it, a lot of it, various types of trauma. And what mitigates against the reset button is what's going to be different. What's the new reset? And so I have to acknowledge in places where I don't fully understand the desires of my heart, I don't fully understand what favor looks like. I don't fully understand what it means to be a drunken captive coming back from Zion, who's living in the perpetual bliss of the avalanche of blessing, outpouring, and things returned that were lost in terms of opportunities and doors open. If you've been anyone that's had hope deferred, been anyone who's been through ton of disappointment, it's sometimes switching that gear and just doing the reset. It's kind of like this. Sometimes I have to have an encounter to have an encounter. So I'm asking for that encounter. Jesus, would you do the first encounter that enables me to see something in my perspectives and my perspective that changes the way I see and that helps me flip into what you're doing so that the enemy doesn't get mileage out of us being stuck in trauma, but us being able to literally say that in 2025, all things will be new, 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 new. We will see streams in the desert. We will see things happening that have never happened before. We will see breakthroughs and destiny things that happen that we could have never imagined. And so, Lord, I'm just kind of filling that out as our prayer at the end, my prayer at the end, that you would do the movement on the interior landscape that allows us to walk into the landscape of 2025 without anything holding us back, fully able to receive what you want to do. And so come and do what we cannot. All right. Blessings, episode 3. Episode 4 is coming. All right. Peace out.